I feel the need for speed. Contact 2 Fox Bats approaching fast from the south. Deploy Eagles 107 and 108 now. The parameters of war change with every new conflict, and World War II was one that made this most explicit. According to Sun Tzu, the ability to achieve victory by changing and adapting according to the enemy is called genius. A good commander must always be attentive to the changes brought by the present, always seeking to update himself and step out of his comfort zone. In the late 1930s, with the prospect of a likely war in the Pacific Ocean, a few military officers from Japan and the United States invested in the development of a new type of vessel, which, although still relatively rudimentary, had the potential to completely change the type of combat fought over the deep waters of the ocean: the aircraft carrier. Even though the construction of powerful battleships and cruisers was still favored, the Japanese Navy had 10 operational aircraft carriers before the start of hostilities with the United States. The use of naval aviation was the result of a change in doctrine by the Japanese Navy, led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who already recognized the effectiveness of combining ships and aircraft. For a long time, Yamamoto knew that regardless of the number of ships and weapons Japan had, the industrial capacity of the United States would easily be able to overcome any efforts of the fragile Japanese industry. In a war effort, which is exactly what ended up happening, to contain the American drive to continue hostilities, however, Admiral Yamamoto planned a decisive blow at the beginning of the fighting, a way to fatally undermine American morale and any means of quick military response the Americans might have. And then, after months of preparation, Pearl Harbor was attacked. On December 7, 1941, a swarm of Japanese fighters and torpedo bombers attacked the largest American military concentration in the Pacific. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and countless other types of vessels were sunk or severely damaged in the shallow waters of the naval base, in a precise attack that also caused serious damage to the island's infrastructure. With the loss of only 59 aviators, the Japanese Navy had struck at the heart of the American fleet, causing damage that even the industrial titan would take a long time to fully recover from. It was proven in a historic and effective way what an aircraft carrier could do, more than just a way to deliver a fast, precise strike force over long distances. The aircraft carrier is a weapon of deterrence and a reaffirmation of geopolitical power, a means of establishing dominance and intimidating potential enemies, one of the most feared weapons to this day. But what many forget is that every time we have a new weapon gaining prominence on the battlefield, measures soon appear to nullify the advantages it offers. It was the same with the development of the submarine, which initially caused chaos for unsuspecting navies, but soon became a victim of sonar. Hydrophones and depth charges made the next submarines quieter and able to travel at greater depths, which led to even more efficient submarine destruction measures, and so on. It was no different with the aircraft carrier. These symbols of power, which over the years increased in displacement and grandeur, became the operational heart of the world's major navies. And along with that role, a big target was also painted on the decks of all these great steel titans. With the aim of defending aircraft carriers, several aircraft were created to protect the vessel from possible enemies. In the 1960s, with anti-ship missiles launched by other planes and ships becoming more modern, like the Soviet K-22s, the protection of aircraft carriers should be the responsibility of a fast aircraft with easy mobilization, capable of employing the advanced technologies necessary for interception. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy appointed Robert McNamara to be his Secretary of Defense. During this period, the United States Navy and Air Force were looking for a new aircraft to meet the specific needs of each branch. The Air Force was developing the Tactical Fighter Experimental Project, and the Navy was working on the Fighter Air Defense Fleet, which stands for Fighter Air Defense Fleet. Both projects had similar requirements: a supersonic, twin-engine aircraft that could carry 2 crew members and had a large capacity for fuel and armaments. McNamara, however, believed that the American government was unnecessarily spending resources on various projects. He didn't understand the need to have several aircraft for different purposes and considered the myriad of planes in the American fleet to be a great exaggeration. Because of this, even against the wishes of the Navy and Air Force military, he unified the 2 projects into one, favoring the characteristics of the Air Force, with the same fighter jet having to be adopted by the Navy with some modifications to be operated, the carrier-based one. Most American aviation companies tried to submit a proposal for the project, since it would be an aircraft that would carry out very different missions, replacing iconic fighters like the F-8 Crusader, the F-4 Phantom, and even the F-104 Starfighter. Among the competitors was Boeing, which was famous for building large subsonic transport aircraft. Since the specific requirements of each force were very broad, as the Air Force wanted an aircraft for low-altitude nuclear attacks, and the Navy wanted a fast interceptor with a powerful radar, so the company decided to submit 2 different designs. The 818 model would be submitted to the Air Force, and the 818N model would be submitted to the Navy. Both aircraft would share 50% of their components, each one having a different focus for its mission. This, however, made Boeing's project considerably more expensive than the other projects. On the other side, there was a partnership between General Dynamics, which had never built a naval fighter, and Grumman, one of the largest and most efficient designers of naval fighters in history. With planes like the F-4F Wildcat and the F-6F Hellcat, for a long time it was a tradition of the company to name its carrier-based fighter aircraft with names related to felines, and this tradition would continue in its new project. However, Boeing got it right by developing different planes, because McNamara's idea of designing a single fighter for both the Navy and the Air Force did not please the military members of the selection committee. The Boeing engineers then decided to favor the features requested by the Air Force, since it was the main client involved. And after analyzing all the projects, Boeing's idea was completely accepted by the Air Force, even though it went against one of the main proposals of the FTX program, which was saving resources. However, a short time after the confirmation, the Air Force backed out and canceled its choice. Because of the engine chosen for the aircraft, the General Electric MF-295, which was only a project and did not yet have a prototype built, the Navy had also rejected the proposal, which happened once again during the arrival of the second round of project submissions. On the third attempt, once again the Air Force approved the project, and once again the Navy rejected it. The admirals would not accept a design that could not fully meet the required needs and would not yield to McNamara's wishes. As a result, the admirals were immediately all transferred to the reserve by the Secretary. And then came the fourth and final round of the process. The options presented were an initial version of the F-111, with a version called F-111B for the Navy, from the Grumman Consortium. General Dynamics and the 818 from Boeing both were considered very satisfactory. With an exotic design of air intakes on the top of the fuselage, the winner of the process ended up being Boeing. Even though it was cheaper to produce than the competitor from Grumman, the savings from using parts common to other aircraft were much lower than expected. Added to that, there were McNamara's doubts about Boeing's ability to produce a supersonic fighter with carrier capability superior to the other two largest naval fighter manufacturers in the world. This led him to change the project selection to the proposal from Grumman General Dynamics, resulting in the legendary F-111 Aardvark. Aardvark is a word of African origin that names an animal similar to a pig, with a large and long snout, which resembled the nose of an aircraft. The F-111 was the first aircraft to feature a new type of wing, variable geometry wings. With this configuration, the pilot could change, either on the ground or in flight, the angle that the wings make with the fuselage. By using this feature, the aircraft could fly with the wings extended, increasing lift and allowing it to fly at lower speeds without stalling, and take off more easily, or retract them to reduce drag, allowing it to reach higher speeds without compromising the structure and saving fuel. There was also a middle ground to engage in turns during aerial combat at high speeds. The pylons or racks where the weapons were suspended also rotated to offer the least possible drag. This revolutionary feature went on to influence later aircraft, such as the Sukhoi Su-17, the Mikhail Gurevich MiG-23, the Panavia Tornado, and the Sukhoi Su-24. The development of such a wing property was quite complicated, with the initial versions of the F-111 showing microscopic cracks in its structure, which was subjected to large amounts of structural stress. The Air Force version of the F-111 was well received, as it introduced a large number of innovative technologies for the time, such as the use of afterburners. It also had an escape pod that could be ejected in case of emergency, carrying the two-man crew who sat side by side, as well as being able to employ laser-guided weapons. The F-111 was 5 meters tall, had a wingspan of 19 meters, and was 22 meters long. And it saw intense combat in Vietnam in 1968 up until the Gulf War, in 1991 with its last variants being retired in the 2000s. The version for the Navy, however, did not see as much success. With the initial version of the F-111B having excessive weight, 5 tons more than allowed, it was necessary to redo the design and part of the project. The F-111B had a shorter nose than the Air Force version, so it could fit on aircraft carriers. The long-range air intercept missile, 54 Phoenix missiles, were also tested on the prototypes, but performance issues plagued the project until the end. Without the necessary power to defend the fleet in time, the naval version of the legendary F-111 was canceled in July 1968. Now, the Navy quickly needed a platform that could defend the greatest symbol of military power on Earth in the shortest possible time. And there was no one better than Grumman Aircraft Corporation to fulfill their request, winning a contract to research the design of a new carrier-based supersonic jet fighter. In 1966, Grumman's specialists came up with Design 303, thanks to the great influence of its project manager, Vice Admiral Thomas Francis Connolly Jr., and the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Thomas Hinman Moore. Combined with the tradition of naming naval fighters after felines, the Tomcat, or Tomcat, was born. Project 303, which would later be designated as the F-14. Tomcat had the mission of replacing the fleet of F-4 Phantom. In addition, it featured superior maneuverability compared to it. During the early combat in the Vietnam War, it was observed that the MiG-21 aircraft had superior performance in close air combat and maneuverability. The fast but still heavy F-4S struggled when engaging the small and nimble Vietnamese MiGs, which also had cannons, something the early versions of the F-4 did not have. Because a flawed American doctrine believed that air combat would only be conducted with missiles, Many kill opportunities were lost when American pilots found themselves at close range with the enemy, but they couldn't shoot them down because of the minimum lock-on distance of the missiles, or because the missiles malfunctioned. The lesson had been learned, and based on it, a legend would now emerge. The Navy then started the VFAX program, or Experimental Fighter Attack Aircraft, which, after the failure of the F-11B, called for an aircraft with a maximum speed of Mach 2. 2 crew members, 2 engines with tandem seats, one behind the other, and that it should have a high-rate 20mm Vulcan cannon for close air combat. The aircraft should have a modern weapons system capable of employing Air Intercept Missile, 54 Phoenix Air Intercept Missile, 7 Sparrow and Air Intercept Missile, 9 Sidewinder missiles. Grumman's design was one of the finalists and managed to win the competition in early 1969. The new aircraft would inherit some features from its late predecessor, the F-111B, the AWG 9X band pulse. Doppler radar system was incorporated into the design, giving the F-14 the capability for beyond visual range combat, or beyond visual range. This allowed the Tomcat to lock on and fire missiles long before being detected by Soviet radars, or even before being seen by an attentive pilot, making it perfect for the mission of intercepting hostile aircraft that wanted to attack the fleet. Its 2 General Electric F-110, General Electric 400 engines were side by side at the rear of the aircraft, generating almost 28,000 pounds of thrust. This power allowed the aircraft to reach 2,500 kilometers per hour and 15 kilometers of altitude, with a range of 3,000 kilometers. Above each engine, on the fuselage, 2 huge vertical stabilizers stood out, each with a rudder set at a slight angle to each other, making them not parallel. The Tomcat's cockpit was spacious for its size, with a crew of 2 military personnel, a pilot and a radar intercept officer in the pilot's position. At the top of the instrument panel, there was a heads-up display, a type of equipment that projects the most vital information onto a piece of transparent glass. In the center was the Air Combat Maneuver panel, which showed the status of the weapons to be used, with a large vertical indicator display just below it that complemented the information from the heads-up display. The control stick was located between the pilot's legs, with the throttle lever to the left for controlling power. The seats were arranged in tandem, with only the pilot having access to the instruments that control the aircraft's maneuvers, such as the control stick. The interception officer was responsible for operating the quite complex and numerous weapon systems, as well as the aircraft's radar. This was the reason for the requirement of 2 people to make the most of the F-14's features. The landing gear was reinforced to withstand the abrupt and intense landings on aircraft carriers. It was also equipped with a hook on the underside to attach to the arresting system on the deck. It consisted of strong steel cables that held the aircraft and were cushioned until the plane came to a complete stop. With 10 hardpoints on its wings, the F-14 could carry a real arsenal for its primary mission, which was combat air patrol. It could fight at close range with its 20mm Vulcan cannon and its Sidewinder missiles, which tracked infrared signatures at medium distances. With its Sparrow radar missiles, or take down enemies up to 200 kilometers away with its air intercept missile, 54 Phoenix missiles. To avoid bureaucratic delays, the Navy skipped the prototype construction phase and went straight to mass production of the aircraft. The first model was the F-14A, with 478 units delivered to the Navy, and interestingly, 79 units delivered to Iran. In the early 70s, Iran was still one of the United States' major allies, and the Imperial Iranian Air Force requested an aircraft that could intercept the Mikoyan Gurevich 25, which carried out reconnaissance flights over its territory, coming from the Soviet Union. At that point, the best American interceptor of the time was offered, but without some classified components and with a less powerful engine. In 1979, however, the Shah's government fell and Iran became an Islamic republic, which cut most of its ties with Western countries. Because of that, there was an embargo on many products to the country, especially weapons. And for that reason, after the retirement of the F-14s in 2006, all the planes that would not be displayed in museums or preserved elsewhere were destroyed. To prevent any spare parts from falling into Iranian hands. That's why it's extremely rare to spot any model of the F-14 these days. The Tomcat took part in the United States' withdrawal from Saigon in 1975, but it never saw combat. The F-14's baptism by fire would happen somewhere else, far from there, in international waters near Libya. On August 18, 1981, the United States Sixth Fleet, led by the aircraft carriers United States ship Nimitz and United States ship Forrestal, arrived at the Gulf of Sidra off the coast of Libya. Starting military exercises in international waters, the task force authorized the takeoff of E-2 Hawkeye early warning aircraft, escorted by F-4 and F-14 fighters. The purpose of sending these aircraft around the exercise area was to detect any aggression through early warning. The area for the training had not been chosen at random. In 1973, the Libyan dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi declared that the entire Gulf of Sidra region belonged to his country, which went against international conventions. Because of this, on more than one occasion, Libyan aircraft fired at American planes after they crossed south of the imaginary line he created, called the Line of Death. President Ronald Reagan, upon taking office, decided to challenge the Libyan dictator and then authorized Operation Freedom of Navigation in the Gulf of Sidra. This type of military action can occur when a country starts taking too many actions against free traffic in areas recognized as international waters, and its objective is to intimidate the aggressor and make them cease hostilities. When the Navy was defining the rules of engagement for American aircraft, and they asked the president how far the planes should pursue the enemies, Reagan replied, all the way to the hangar if necessary. With the start of the operation, most of the Libyan interceptor aircraft were sent to drive away the American planes that were crossing the line of death. 2 MiG-25 Foxbat aircraft were detected approaching the training area. To drive them away, F-14S took off, piloted by Lieutenant Lawrence Mudinsky and his wingman, both from the aircraft carrier United States ship Nimitz, belonging to Squadron Fighter Squadron 41. Lieutenant Mudinsky was flying the Fast Eagle 107. As soon as they received the interception orders, the 2 F-14 fighters accelerated to Mach 2.3 and headed toward the hostile aircraft. The incredible acceleration of the F-14 pushed them deep into their seats, and they didn't even hear the sonic boom made by the aircraft as they broke the sound barrier. The enemy MiGs, with their sensors completely confused by the action of the EP-3, Orion, and Electronic Attack 6B Prowler electronic warfare aircraft, would never see the fast jets approaching. Lieutenant Mudinsky's wingman, as soon as he spotted the pair of enemy aircraft, quickly flew past them, and pulling a considerable G-load at a dizzying speed, he positioned himself right behind the enemies. The intercept officer of Eagle 107, sitting in the back seat, pulled out a camera and took a picture of the enemy aircraft's pilot, who was left perplexed when he realized that the enemy plane had not only arrived unnoticed but was now mocking him. Next, the Libyan pilot received an obscene hand gesture from the intercept officer of Eagle 107. After the strange encounter, both MiG-25S immediately broke their flight pattern and returned to their bases. August 18th saw about 70 similar interceptions. The Americans commented that the most exciting part was trying to communicate with the Libyan pilots during the interceptions. With the United States warships sailing below the line of death, the Libyan government thought it was an invasion and put all its military power on alert. As retaliation, they would prepare interception attacks in the following days. On the second day of operations, the plan to protect the training area was the same, with the E-2S providing early warning and the F-14S conducting combat patrols. Lieutenant McGinsky in Fast Eagle 107 was on a mission once again, but now as the wingman of Commander Hank Kleeman in Fast Eagle 102. After an hour of patrol in their assigned sector, at 7:15 in the morning, Commander Kleeman was going to return to the aircraft carrier along with his wingman. That's when his intercept officer detected an unidentified contact, 120 kilometers to the south, approaching their response zone. Both F-14S tried to make contact with the E-2 Hawkeye, which was orbiting near their position. But due to the volume of radio communications, the aircraft did not receive the communication from the two. Entering a loose deuce formation developed in Vietnam, Fast Eagle 107 gained an altitude of 40 feet over its leader and positioned itself slightly behind and to the right of him. After the maneuvers, the enemy contact began to move toward both of them. They then decided to carry out an interception called eyeball shooter, or shooter's eye interception. In this maneuver, the aircraft acting as the eye goes to meet the enemy, while the shooter sneaks up behind the enemies to destroy them. Commander Kleeman served as the eye, while Lieutenant Medinsky served as the shooter. What Kleeman didn't expect, however, was that it wasn't just one enemy plane, but two. The two Libyan Sukhoi Su-22S were flying so close to each other that their radar signature looked like a single aircraft. The operator of the nearby radar plane warned that he had intercepted a transmission from one of the fighters, saying it was ready to fire, which happened just seconds later. The Su-22, which was leading the formation, fired a K-13 missile at the F-14S, which emerged unscathed from the attack. Because the missile lost tracking due to the impressive interception speed of the two groups. And then, over the radio, Commander Kleeman instructed Lieutenant Medinsky, "You take the guy who shot at us, and I'll go after his wingman." After the order, the two F-14S positioned themselves behind the Sukhoi 22, which tried to take evasive action. Kleeman then closed in on the Sukhoi 22, but the Libyan was heading toward the rising sun. The sun interfered with the missile tracking system that followed infrared waves, and his intercept officer needed 10 seconds to make sure the weapon would follow the correct source. With the trigger pressed, the aircraft shook a little as the missile was activated and released. Sidewinder, which left a trail of white smoke as it raced toward the tail of the Sukhoi, which tried to perform aerial maneuvers, was soon hit. The missile had hit the aircraft's control surfaces, rendering them completely useless. The Libyan pilot soon ejected, and the aircraft crashed into the sea. Meanwhile, Medinsky also positioned himself behind another Mikoyan-Gurevich, and upon receiving confirmation to engage from his leader, asked, "Commander, do you want me to shoot mine down?" "Affirmative, shoot him down." Kleeman replied, giving Medinsky possibly the best line a pilot could get. When he tried to use his Sidewinder missiles, Medinsky realized that one of them wasn't working and he couldn't fire it. When he tried to use the short-range radar, he realized that it wasn't working either. And the Su-22, taking advantage of the opportunity, made a sharp turn and pulled 6 Gs trying to shake the enemy off its tail. Medinsky then fired his only functional Sidewinder, which initially lost track and flew right past the hostile aircraft. Immediately, Medinsky switched to the 20mm Vulcan cannon, but his missiles suddenly fired, reacquired the target, pulled an incredible 45 Gs, and hit the unsuspecting Libyan fighter. As soon as the kill was confirmed, Both received a transmission from the United States ship Nimitz, Eagle 102, Eagle 107. This is the United States ship Nimitz. You are authorized to defend yourselves. This is 102 and 107, 2 confirmed kills. The entire engagement had lasted only 3 minutes and 44 seconds. The Libyans had entered the danger zone and had been destroyed in it. And today, Eagle 102 is being restored and preserved for display. Muammar al-Gaddafi would be marked by this incident for decades, where, on more than one occasion, he tried to take revenge on American forces. The operation was considered a success and had largely managed to restore the independence of international waters in the region for any vessels, a result that, however, would not last for long. In the same place where, 8 years earlier, the events described had taken place, the aircraft carrier United States ship John F. Kennedy was moving through international waters toward Israel, and it took the opportunity to demonstrate its strength through military exercises with its aircraft. Around noon, a formation of 2 F-14S Gypsy 202 and 207 were monitoring the exercises of a formation of A-16S who were training in an area far from the Libyan coast. After detecting signals on the radar, they concluded that these were hostile aircraft coming from the Libyan city of Tobruk. Gypsy 207 contact at heading 75, 70 to 100 kilometers away. Formation spotted at 2,000 to 3,000 meters altitude. The confirmation came from a Hawkeye flying nearby, which reported that it was a pair of MiG-23S, known as floggers by NATO. The F-14S were then instructed to carry out a standard interception of the aircraft in order to prevent them from interfering with the exercises. Due to the repeated actions of the dictator Gaddafi, who, years earlier, had blown up a civilian plane over Scotland and was at that time seeking to produce chemical weapons, new rules of engagement authorized American pilots to shoot down any aircraft that did not obey orders not to interfere with the training exercises. Gypsy 207 was piloted by Commander Joseph Connolly with his intercept officer Commander Leo Enright, and Gypsy 202 was piloted by Lieutenant Herman Cook. When they confirmed the direction of the MiG-23 the enemies agreed to turn left, heading east. The MiGs coming from the south copied the Americans' maneuver and turned right, also heading east. Knowing the limitations of the Soviet radars, both Tomcats quickly dropped to 60 meters, staying just 10 meters above the ground. With this maneuver, the MiG's radars and missiles wouldn't be able to distinguish the planes from the interference coming from the ocean. The F-14S now made a slight turn to the left, leaving the MiGs near the nose of their tail. For a brief moment, while they received authorization from the aircraft carrier to carry out the interception in whatever way they thought best, the floggers noticed the moment and accelerated with everything they had to leave the F-14S behind. The Americans kept making turns to assess the intentions of the Libyan pilots, and after the 5th round, the MiGs mirrored the Tomcat's movement, signaling that it was time for action. Now both pairs were on a collision course, with the American pair coming from the north and the Libyans from the south. As soon as the MiGs entered the F-14's radar range, Gypsy 207 quickly fired a missile. Fox 1! Fox 1! The Sparrow radar-guided missile had been fired by the intercept officer of Gypsy 207. But in the excitement of the moment, he hadn't followed the entire firing checklist and surprised Commander Connolly. Due to a mechanical failure, the missile missed the target, and seconds later, Gypsy fired another Sparrow. But the missile failed to lock onto the target properly and was lost in the vastness of the sea. With the distance getting closer and closer, the F-14S decided to break their flight pattern and began defensive maneuvers. With Gypsy 202 heading west and 207 heading east, forcing the enemies to choose only one target, the MiGs began their pursuit of Gypsy 202 without realizing that now Gypsy 207 was on their tail. Completely unaware of the F-14 lurking behind them, they had also entered the danger zone. Once again firing a Sparrow, the radar managed to lock perfectly onto one of the aggressor MiGs, which exploded and went into a spin, being taken out of the fight. But there was still one enemy left, the remaining MiG. He began his escape, but now on his tail was Gypsy 202, whom he had been hunting moments before. At a very short distance and with a perfect visual on the enemy, Lieutenant Herman Cook, however, couldn't hear the tone indicating that his missile was locking onto the target. Cook made several attempts, but his Sidewinder still wouldn't lock on, and at that moment he was approached by his intercept officer, Lieutenant Commander Stephen Collins. Shoot at him. I don't have a lock. Damn it, shoot at him. Fox 2, I can't. I don't have a lock. It was only then that Cook realized he had made a big mistake. He had forgotten to turn up the volume on the missile lock-on sound system. And as soon as he corrected his mistake, he heard the deafening sound of the weapon, which was eager to take down its target. Missile locked. Fox 2. The Sidewinder flew toward the MiG, and seconds of tension passed until a violent explosion completely destroyed the enemy aircraft. Good kill, good kill. With the kill confirmed, the F-14S escorted the Libyan pilots, who ejected and fell into the sea, and then headed toward the aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, the Libyan Air Force was unable to rescue its pilots, who were never seen again. But it was far from the hot danger zones of the Mediterranean that the F-14 found its element of immortality, being portrayed on movie screens. In the movie Top Gun, the 1986 film starring Tom Cruise, it was a milestone for an entire generation. The cliché scenes of the 80s were interspersed with the roar of the fighter jets, while real-life scenes blended with the beauty of fiction. The impact of the movie was so great that there was a 500% increase in Navy and Air Force recruitment in the year it was released. And even today, it's not uncommon to find aviators with their classic gold Ray-Bans at the controls of aircraft along airways all over the world. In the movie, the young officer Pete Maverick Mitchell joins the United States Navy's elite aviator school, the Top Gun program, along with his radar intercept officer Nick Goose Bradshaw. Both are chosen for the school after an incident with an enemy MiG-28. Actually, the MiG-28 is a fictional aircraft portrayed in the movie by a Northrop F-5. It features an aggressor squadron camouflage, meaning it serves as the enemy to train American pilots. It's also possible to spot aircraft with similar camouflage during the combat scenes with the instructors who use A-4 Skyhawks. The Top Gun school actually exists, although it's not exactly as shown in the movie. It's officially known as the Navy Fighter Weapons School, earning its famous nickname Top Gun because of the elite profile of the pilots it trains. It's the institution responsible for training and improving the best Navy pilots who complete the course and then return to their bases as elite instructors. The routine within the program is extremely tough, with studies and pre-flight preparation being as demanding as possible. To encourage professionalism and remind everyone that real life is not a Hollywood movie, pilots must pay a $5 fine every time they make a reference to the movie Top Gun inside the school. Such is the importance of Top Gun that Colonel Robin Olds, when he did his inspection tour of Air Force pilots in Asia in the 1960s, noticed that the pilots were only used to combat involving missile launches, and that many of the close combat techniques with guns were not being studied as much as they should have been. As a result, he correctly predicted that the Air Force's casualties in the event of a conflict, such as the Vietnam War, would be considerable. The Navy, however, managed to maintain a higher average of survivability and kills precisely because of the Top Gun program. The Grumman F-14 Tomcat was a fighter jet that marked generations of pilots. The plane that showed everyone the power and the indescribable feeling of flying a high-performance aircraft. An aircraft that revolutionized with new technologies and protected the greatest symbols of American military power for almost half a century. Do you also feel the need for speed? In the movie Top Gun, Maverick loses his best friend Goose in an accident. When they were very close to the enemy aircraft, the air vortices generated by Iceman's plane created aerodynamic instability that shut down the engines and caused a stall in Tom Cruise's Tomcat. When ejecting, Goose hits his head on the canopy, which hadn't been properly ejected since its removal depended on wind speed. And since they were in a flat spin, a small vacuum was created, keeping part of the structure still attached to the plane. This case is based on facts and happened to Lieutenant David J. Goose, an interception officer who passed away. Just like Goose from the movie, his case became famous, and during the development stages of the film, his name was immortalized in the feature. But in Brazil, we also have our own Goose, who we miss very much. On November 4th, 2022, a T-25 aircraft from the Air Force Academy lost radar contact in the Florianopolis region. Immediately, the Pelican Squadron of the Brazilian Air Force dispatched a C-105 Amazonas aircraft, which began an almost 20-hour relentless search for the two crew members of the aircraft. Fourth-year aviation cadet junior from the Patrol Aviation and Captain Aviator Alves, instructor at the Air Force Academy. On the fifth day, both were found already deceased by the search and rescue team. Today we know that, like every aviator, they just took off for the noblest mission of any night of the sky. You left doing what all of us love, and I know it was what made you excited every day. Rest assured, friends, you leave us with a deep sense of longing, but also with great satisfaction for having had the pleasure of living alongside both of you. Examples of family colleagues, of effort, and of human beings. Rest in peace, friends. Bruno Fontanova. So did you like our content? If you want the War Room to keep producing these videos, consider supporting us. You can help us by sending us a Pix or through our campaign on Apoia-C, where you'll get access to our exclusive WhatsApp group and have your name displayed here in the videos. The link is right here in the description. Well, if you like this video, don't forget to share it with your friends. Also, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything else. I'll be going now. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from Sala de Guerra.